The HOA thought they'd struck gold by building 96 dream homes, but the real owner of the land was waiting, and they walked right into her trap. Imagine waking up one morning, looking out your window, and realizing the land your family has protected for generations is covered in brand new houses. Houses you never gave anyone permission to build. That's exactly what happened to Marjorie Whitfield, a 62-year-old retired school administrator in suburban Georgia. For Marjorie, the land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was history. Nearly 40 acres passed down from her parents, who had worked hard, paid it off piece by piece, and reminded her as a girl that land is the one thing they can't make more of. She remembered walking it barefoot as a child, chasing fireflies at dusk, and listening to her father talk about how he wanted her to always hold on to it. So even when developers ignored it, even when neighbors sold off their plots, she never wavered. Most people didn't notice the value of her property. It sat on the edge of a growing suburb just outside Macon, Georgia, where chain stores had started popping up, but plenty of fields remained untouched. Developers looked at Marjorie's land as inconvenient: trees, uneven patches, and stubborn clay soil. She looked at it as priceless. And unlike many who inherit property, she didn't neglect it. She paid the taxes every year on time. She kept the paperwork organized in a fireproof safe. She even asked her attorney friend Samuel Drayton to review the title every few years, just in case. "Marjorie, you've got yourself a fortress here," Samuel told her during one of their kitchen table meetings. "No one's taking this from you." She smiled politely, but she knew how things could work in the real world. People with money and power often believed they could bend rules. She wasn't about to give them an opening. That's why it shocked her one summer afternoon to drive past a back road near her property and see a bulldozer tearing into the earth. At first, she thought it was routine county work, maybe utilities or road repairs. But a week later, she returned to find survey stakes in neat rows and construction crews pouring concrete. Marjorie pulled her car over and waved down a worker in a neon vest. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" she asked. "New subdivision, ma'am," the man replied, barely looking up. "Lakewood Meadows, 90-something homes going up. Gonna be beautiful." Her heart sank. 90 homes. On her land. At first, she thought it had to be a mistake. Surely someone had double-checked the records. Surely no professional developer would just assume land was free for the taking. But as the weeks passed, houses started rising. Wood frames, rooftops, then siding. She drove by every few days, watching strangers claim what she had guarded her entire life. When she told friends at church, some didn't believe her. "They can't just build without asking," one woman said, but Marjorie pulled out her yellowed folder of documents. Deeds, tax receipts, maps going back to the 1950s. "They didn't ask," she said quietly. "And they didn't check." What Marjorie didn't know yet was that the Lakewood Meadows Homeowners Association, working with a regional builder, had assumed her acreage was unused. A clerical error decades ago had left the parcel listed in county records under a vague description. The HOA had swooped in, bought adjacent lots, and extended their reach without noticing that nearly 40 acres were still under private ownership. To them, it looked like a blank canvas. To her, it was a legacy. As the first homes sold, "For sale" signs disappeared almost overnight. Families, thrilled to move into shiny new builds, brought in moving trucks and hung curtains. Kids rode bikes on freshly paved cul-de-sacs. The HOA president, Clifford Myers, boasted to local papers about creating a thriving modern neighborhood. But behind Clifford's press quotes and ribbon-cutting photos, a storm was brewing, because the one person they failed to account for was the woman sitting quietly in her modest ranch house a mile away. The woman who had been filing tax payments like clockwork for 4 decades. Marjorie wasn't angry in the way some might expect. She was calculated. Each evening, she sat at her dining room table, spreading out her documents, circling dates and drafting letters with Samuel. She didn't scream. She didn't protest in the streets. She planned. Because she knew something the HOA didn't. Once the courts saw her records, there would be no question. Those homes weren't theirs. They were sitting on her property. And in her mind, the question wasn't if she would win, it was how high the price of that victory would be. But while Marjorie was preparing her quiet storm, the HOA was celebrating, certain they had just built the crown jewel of the county. The thing about Marjorie Whitfield was simple. She didn't play catch-up in life. She planned. That habit had carried her through 3 decades as a school administrator, where being one step ahead of crises wasn't optional, it was survival. And when it came to her land, she treated it no differently. Long before bulldozers rolled in, she had made it her routine to drive into downtown Macon twice a year to review property tax records. The clerks all knew her by name. "Mrs. Whitfield, you're one of the few who still comes in person." One clerk teased once. Marjorie smiled back. "That's because I don't like surprises." Her philosophy was simple. If you protect what's yours, you never have to beg to get it back. And while neighbors had lost acres to foreclosure or confusing sales over the years, she stood firm. Her parents' voices were always in her ear. She would walk the boundaries of the land every spring, sometimes with her cousin Thomas, who still lived nearby. They'd carry a thermos of sweet tea, stroll past the pine trees, and note if fences needed repair. "Still yours, Marge," Thomas would say, tapping one of the old iron markers buried near the corner. Ain't nobody taking this from the Whitfields. But Marjorie knew better than to trust words alone. She wanted paperwork, signatures, dates, evidence. And that's why, 3 years before the HOA's project even started, she sat down with attorney Samuel Drayton in his office off Spring Street. "I keep hearing chatter about survey disputes," she told him, sliding a folder across the desk. "Developers are circling this county like hawks. I need to make sure my land can't be touched." Samuel flipped through the folder, eyebrows raised. "Marjorie, this is better than most courthouses keep. You've got receipts, maps, and even your dad's handwritten notes." "I've been ready since '88, she replied dryly. The two of them went line by line through the deed chain, verifying nothing had been sold, transferred, or even leaned against. Samuel updated her will to reflect the land and filed a quiet title action just to ensure the court reaffirmed ownership. It was, as he said, belt and suspenders lawyering. That move would prove to be the very thing that saved her later. Because when the HOA's development crossed her boundary, there was already a clear, court-recognized paper trail with her name on it. Meanwhile, the HOA's leadership, people like Clifford Myers, the proud, sharp-tongued president, saw her as invisible. They drove past her ranch home and barely gave it a second thought. To them, she was just another retiree with too much grass to mow. They couldn't have been more wrong. One afternoon, as Marjorie and Samuel sat at her dining room table, he laid out the possibilities. "They'll probably argue ignorance," he said. "Say it was a mistake, some oversight in the county files." Marjorie stirred sugar into her tea. "Ignorance doesn't move a bulldozer," she said flatly. Samuel leaned back. "You understand what this means, right? Once these families move in, the stakes get higher. This isn't just about money, it's going to turn emotional. People will see you as the villain, even though you're the rightful owner." "I've been painted worse," she said. "They'll see the truth in court." Her calmness surprised even him. But it wasn't the calm of someone disengaged. It was the stillness of a woman sharpening her sword before battle. When construction picked up pace, Marjorie didn't shout. She documented. She snapped photos from public roads. She marked down dates. She even videotaped one day as trucks rolled in, concrete poured, and "sold" signs hammered into the ground. She kept it all in a neatly labeled binder. Evidence. Lakewood Meadows. Her cousin Thomas asked her once why she wasn't making a scene. "Why not chain yourself to a tree or call the local news?" He pressed. "Because they expect noise," she replied. "Noise fades, paperwork doesn't." And with every week that passed, her case grew stronger. The irony was brutal. While the HOA toasted their success, the woman they had disregarded had already laid the groundwork to dismantle them. Her property taxes were current to the penny. Her title had been reaffirmed by a judge. Her lawyer was briefed. And her evidence binder was so detailed it could have doubled as a construction log. The trap wasn't built overnight. It was crafted slowly, deliberately, over years of vigilance. They thought she was just a quiet retiree living out her days. In reality, she was the one person in the county they should have feared. But while Marjorie fortified her defenses, the HOA was busy expanding their dream, believing they had secured the land of opportunity without realizing they'd built straight into someone else's fortress. For the Lakewood Meadows Homeowners Association, the project was supposed to be their crown jewel, the suburban dream, rows of identical rooftops shining under the Georgia sun, manicured lawns stretching down to cul-de-sacs, and a swimming pool in the center to tie it all together. They weren't just selling houses, they were selling status, community, the image of "you've made it." And no one was more vocal about that vision than Clifford Myers, the HOA president. Clifford was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and a knack for charming developers at luncheons. He had built his reputation on getting things done, even if it meant cutting corners. "We're not just building homes," Clifford told the local paper at a ribbon-cutting event. "We're building a legacy neighborhood, something people will remember as a model of progress." The audience clapped politely. Cameras clicked, and behind the scenes, Clifford and his board were already negotiating with Hanover Construction, a mid-sized builder eager to expand in Bibb County. The pitch was simple. Lakewood Meadows would double in size, taking in a wide stretch of what appeared on county maps as unclaimed land. The only problem? No one actually bothered to confirm ownership. A junior project manager at Hanover raised the issue in a meeting, flipping through faded county plats. "Looks like parcel 1467 still has a name attached." "Whitfield." Clifford waved it off. "Paperwork error. Probably some old farm that's long gone. We'll clear it up after the build." That was Clifford's style. Start fast, fix later. His confidence rubbed off on the entire board. They believed paperwork was a formality, something their lawyers could handle once the community was up and running. After all, who in their right mind would stand against 96 brand-new homes filled with families? The ambition wasn't just about housing. Clifford and the board saw dollar signs. A bigger community meant higher HOA dues, more power, and personal recognition. Local banks lined up to back the project. Real estate agents bragged about Phase 2, and Hanover Construction kept its crews running 6 days a week to stay on schedule. To outside eyes, it looked unstoppable. Bulldozers cleared trees, surveyors pounded stakes, foundations appeared like teeth across the land. Even the mayor stopped by once to shake hands with Clifford and snap a photo beside the first framed house. In neighborhood meetings, Clifford painted the picture vividly. "Folks, this expansion means our property values are going to skyrocket," he said, tapping his finger against a PowerPoint slide. "We're talking schools improving, retail moving closer, a safer, stronger community. Lakewood Meadows is about to be the place to live in central Georgia." Homeowners cheered. They trusted him. They trusted the process. But cracks were already showing. Not in the homes, they were solid enough, but in the foundation of the deal itself. Contractors whispered about the vague land records. A Hanover accountant quietly flagged a discrepancy in acreage reports. Even one county clerk mentioned to a board member that the Whitfield name still popped up in the database. Instead of slowing down, Clifford doubled down. "If we pump the brakes, we lose momentum," he told his board. "Momentum is everything. Families are ready to buy, and we're not going to scare them with technicalities." His words carried weight. By fall, half the homes were under contract. By winter, moving trucks were unloading sofas and flat-screen TVs. Kids were racing around in driveways. Holiday wreaths hung on brand-new doors. To the families, it was paradise. But ambition often blinds. And in this case, it blinded everyone inside the HOA boardroom. They believed they were too big to fail. They believed if ownership issues ever surfaced, they could settle cheaply. A payout here, a quiet deal there. After all, what retiree would want to go up against a machine like theirs? At one HOA mixer, Clifford bragged to a group of new residents about how smoothly the project had gone. "Land's land," he chuckled, holding a plastic cup of wine. "Half the time it's tied up in red tape. We just cut through it. That's how you make progress." The families laughed, some uncomfortably, others admiring his boldness. But in that moment, one truth became clear. Clifford wasn't just ambitious. He was reckless. Because while he raised his glass and celebrated growth, he had no idea that just a mile away, Marjorie Whitfield sat with her binder of evidence, watching everything. To Clifford, she was invisible. To her, he was writing the opening chapter of his downfall. But Clifford's blind ambition wasn't just going to cost him. It was about to drag 96 unsuspecting families into a nightmare they never saw coming. By the time the first houses in Lakewood Meadows were halfway finished, Marjorie Whitfield had stopped driving past with casual curiosity. She now drove past with her phone in hand, filming, documenting, narrating every step like a teacher giving a lesson. Lot 12, framing completed. Lot 14, roof installed, she whispered into the microphone. It wasn't for nostalgia. It was evidence. Still, her shock hadn't faded. Standing in her kitchen one afternoon, she told her cousin Thomas, "I can't believe they just plowed right over my land like I was invisible." Thomas shook his head. "They think money makes them bulletproof, but you've got the law on your side. Don't let them scare you." But intimidation came quickly. The first hint was a glossy flyer left in her mailbox advertising the new Lakewood Meadows expansion. Homes starting at $299,000. Marjorie stared at the flyer, recognizing the layout of her own land on the map. The audacity made her laugh, a short, bitter sound. She showed it to her attorney, Samuel Drayton, at their next meeting. He frowned, rubbing his chin. "They're not hiding what they're doing. They're daring you to challenge it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do," she replied. The next sign came from a conversation in the parking lot of a grocery store. Marjorie ran into Glenda Barnes, a neighbor from down the road. "You seen what they're building?" Glenda asked. "Seen it, and it's mine," Marjorie answered, her voice sharp. Glenda blinked. "What do you mean, yours?" "That land. They're building on my inheritance. They just didn't bother to check." Word started spreading, at first as whispers. A woman at church asked if it was true she was suing the new subdivision. A deacon told her she should just take the money and walk away. But Marjorie wasn't looking for fast cash. She wanted justice. Her first official step was sending a cease and desist letter drafted by Samuel. The HOA received it on a Friday morning. Clifford Myers, the president, read it and laughed. "This woman thinks she's going to scare us with paperwork," he told the board. "She doesn't have the resources to fight us." He tossed the letter aside, confident it would go nowhere. But Marjorie wasn't bluffing. Samuel filed suit within weeks, attaching every document she had meticulously saved. The complaint landed on the HOA's desk like a hammer. Property deeds, tax receipts, boundary maps, even a copy of her parents' probate records showing the land's transfer decades earlier. Clifford still didn't take it seriously. "It'll get tossed," he told Hanover Construction at their next meeting. These cases always do. What he underestimated was how thorough Marjorie had been. She wasn't some panicked retiree throwing mud at the wall. She had prepared for this moment long before they ever broke ground. Meanwhile, the first families started moving into their new homes. Moving trucks rumbled through the streets, kids unpacked bikes, parents planted flowers in front yards. They had no idea that their dream homes were sitting on a fault line of ownership that could crack wide open at any moment. One new homeowner, Victor Ramirez, remembered overhearing two workers argue near his driveway. "I'm telling you, this land isn't clean," one said. "There's a Whitfield name still on the file." The other worker shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Houses are sold already." Victor brushed it off at the time, but it would come back to haunt him. Back at Marjorie's house, the tension grew heavier. She and Samuel strategized almost daily, poring over responses from the HOA's attorneys. They weren't denying the land was hers outright. They were trying to argue that her claim was outdated, that she hadn't actively used the property. Samuel smirked when he read it. "They're desperate. This won't hold." Still, Marjorie understood the uphill climb. "They're going to paint me like I'm heartless," she said one evening. "Like I want to kick families out on the street." Samuel nodded. "And you need to be ready for that. Because this isn't just law, it's optics." She was ready. Ready to face the whispers in church pews, the cold looks at the grocery store, the subtle pressure to roll over. She knew her community, and she knew how quickly people could turn against the person who disrupted their comfort. But she also knew she hadn't worked her entire life to hand over her family's land to a group of people who thought rules didn't apply to them. The first signs of trouble were no longer whispers. They were headlines waiting to be written, and Marjorie, calm and unflinching, was stepping into the storm with her binder of evidence and the law on her side. But as her case built momentum, the families who had just hung pictures on their walls were about to realize the ground under their feet wasn't theirs at all. By early spring, Lakewood Meadows looked like the picture on a real estate billboard. The cul-de-sacs were finished, the sidewalks poured, and streetlights glowed at dusk. Trucks with logos from moving companies rolled in nearly every weekend. Families unloaded boxes, kids ran across driveways, and golden retrievers sniffed at freshly laid sod. From the outside, it looked like the American dream was thriving. But under the glossy surface, a storm was already brewing. The first family to move in was the Ramirez family: Victor, his wife Angela, and their 2 children. They had saved for years, pinching every dollar to afford their first real home. When they toured the model house, Angela fell in love with the kitchen. "This is where we'll host Thanksgiving," she said, running her hand across the granite counters. Victor signed the contract with pride, believing they had secured stability for their children. They weren't alone. Lauren and Tyler Briggs, a young couple from Warner Robins, bought one of the 3-bedroom homes near the edge of the development. For them, it was an escape from a cramped apartment. "We finally have a backyard," Tyler said, watching his dog chase after a stick. Lauren painted the nursery for the baby they were expecting in July. On another street, Darnell and Monica Price, a retired postal worker, and his wife, saw the home as their reward after years of hard labor. Monica told her sister over the phone, "This is where we'll grow old together. We finally found peace." The HOA celebrated each closing with quiet confidence. At every meeting, Clifford Myers updated the board. "We're 80% sold already. This community is a model for the region." Applause followed, glasses clinked, and no one dared question him. But not all the new homeowners felt at ease. Rumors trickled in. Victor Ramirez recalled hearing neighbors whisper at a block party about some woman claiming she owns the land. At first, they laughed it off. "Scare tactics," one man said. "People always come out of the woodwork when money's involved." Yet a few were unsettled by the letter some residents received. Legal notices sent by Marjorie's attorney informing them of the pending lawsuit. Angela found one taped to their door one morning. She handed it to Victor with shaking hands. "Is this real?" she asked. Victor read it twice. "It can't be. They wouldn't sell us a house on land they don't own." But the pit in his stomach said otherwise. Meanwhile, Marjorie drove through the subdivision one Sunday afternoon, watching kids pedal bikes down streets named after trees that had once grown there. Her land was now covered in vinyl siding and mailboxes. She felt no joy, only a deeper resolve. She didn't hate the families, she pitied them. They were victims of someone else's arrogance, but they weren't her responsibility. The HOA and Hanover Construction had created this mess. At the same time, tension grew at homeowners' gatherings. Clifford stood at the head of the clubhouse one evening, addressing worried residents. "I want to put your minds at ease," he said, smiling confidently. "Yes, there's a woman making claims about the property, but our attorneys assure us there is no merit. You have nothing to worry about." A man in the back raised his hand. "But what if she wins?" "She won't," Clifford shot back. "And even if she tries, the county won't let 90 families lose their homes. Trust me, we're solid." The reassurance quieted some, but not all. A few homeowners started Googling Marjorie's name. They found her decades of clean tax records, her parents' probate filings, even old news clippings showing her family pictured on the land. The realization set in. This wasn't some random woman stirring up drama. This was the rightful owner. Angela Ramirez sat at her kitchen table one night, whispering to Victor, "What if everything we've worked for disappears? What if we're squatting and don't even know it?" Victor clenched his jaw. "I'll fight before I let that happen. But if this is true, then we bought into a lie." By summer, Lakewood Meadows looked alive on the surface. Children chasing sprinklers, mail carriers making their rounds, lawn mowers buzzing on weekends. But beneath the cheer, there was anxiety. Homeowners carried quiet doubts, wondering if the ground beneath them truly belonged to them at all. For Marjorie, every sold sign she passed confirmed the strength of her case. The more homes built, the more expensive the mistake. And she had every receipt, every document, every map needed to prove it. But while families unpacked their boxes and Clifford smoothed over concerns, the lawsuit was gaining speed. And soon, none of them would be able to pretend the land was theirs. The moment the first homeowner received a legal notice, the Lakewood Meadows HOA realized Marjorie Whitfield wasn't bluffing. She was coming for them. And she wasn't alone. Her attorney, Samuel Drayton, filed the lawsuit in Bibb County Superior Court with meticulous precision, attaching nearly 4 decades of property records. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a timeline of stewardship that no judge could ignore. Marjorie herself never delivered the news with fireworks. She didn't storm the HOA office or plaster signs across her yard. Instead, she moved quietly, deliberately, as though she had been rehearsing this confrontation for years. And in many ways, she had. One evening at her dining table, she and Samuel reviewed the first set of responses from the HOA's lawyers. The thick packet sat between them, filled with legal jargon and dismissals of her claim. "They're leaning on technicalities," Samuel said, flipping pages. "They're trying to argue you abandoned the land. That's their whole strategy." Marjorie raised an eyebrow. "Abandoned? I paid those taxes every year while they were throwing parties." She wasn't wrong. Samuel pulled out her stack of receipts and smiled. "This right here will shred their argument." Word of the lawsuit spread quickly among the homeowners. At first, many thought it was an exaggerated rumor, but then a few began receiving letters addressed to occupant, warning that their homes might be subject to future legal action. Panic bubbled beneath the surface. Angela Ramirez called Marjorie one afternoon after finding her number online. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm not against you. But what does this mean for us? Are we going to lose our home?" Marjorie paused, her voice steady. "Angela, you should never have been put in this position. I don't want to hurt families, but I can't let the HOA steal from me. This fight isn't with you, it's with them." Angela exhaled shakily. "I believe you. I just don't know how we'll survive if this all falls apart." The more homeowners learned, the more pressure mounted on Clifford Myers and his board. At an HOA meeting, voices grew sharp. "You told us everything was fine," shouted one man. Clifford raised his hands. "It is fine. This is one woman trying to extort us." "She has the deeds!" Another resident yelled back. "I looked them up myself." The room erupted, and Clifford's confident veneer cracked for the first time. Behind closed doors, Hanover Construction grew restless too. Their legal counsel warned Clifford that if Marjorie's claim held, every home they built could be tied up in court. Investors started pulling back. Realtors grew quiet. The Golden Project was beginning to rot from the inside. Marjorie, meanwhile, felt a calm determination. For decades, people had underestimated her because she kept to herself, because she wasn't loud. But she understood something about power. Real power didn't shout. It built quietly until it couldn't be ignored. Samuel encouraged her to stay measured. "You're winning this on paper, Marjorie. Don't get dragged into theatrics." She smiled faintly. "I don't need theatrics. I just need the truth." Still, the pressure wasn't only on the HOA. Marjorie began receiving anonymous letters in her mailbox. One read, "You're ruining families. Drop the case." Another said, "You'll regret this." She showed them to Samuel, who frowned but told her not to be rattled. "This is their fear talking," he said. "Fear means we're closing in." At church, a few people avoided her pew. Some whispered that she was greedy, others said she was heartless. She prayed quietly, holding her head high. If they only knew the whole story, she thought. What kept her steady was remembering her parents' sacrifices, the long hours her father worked at the mill, the way her mother stretched pennies just to keep the land taxes paid. To let it all be erased by arrogance? That was unthinkable. The lawsuit wasn't just about her. It was about legacy, respect, and standing up when others expected silence. The HOA doubled their efforts, hiring a bigger law firm from Atlanta. Clifford gave interviews to local news outlets, painting Marjorie as unreasonable. "We've offered her compensation," he said. "But she won't compromise. We're trying to protect families from being displaced." Marjorie saw the clip on television and shook her head. "Compensation?" she muttered. "They never offered me a dime." The lies only steeled her resolve. She had spent her life teaching children that honesty mattered, that actions had consequences. Now it was her turn to prove it in the real world. Her case wasn't about making friends. It was about making things right. And she knew the longer it dragged on, the more the HOA would reveal their weakness. But the courtroom battle was looming, and once testimony began, the quiet storm Marjorie had prepared was going to break wide open for everyone to see. By the time the case reached the courtroom, the whole county was talking. Local papers splashed headlines like "Mrs. Land Dispute Over Subdivision" across their front pages, and whispers filled coffee shops, barber shops, and school hallways. 96 homes sat in the balance, and everyone wanted to know if Marjorie Whitfield, quiet, 62, retired, could actually bring down an entire homeowners association. The courtroom itself was packed. Families from Lakewood Meadows crowded into wooden benches, some clutching folders of mortgage paperwork, as if that would shield them from the outcome. Realtors, bankers, even county officials filled the aisles, all with nervous eyes fixed on the front. And at the center of it all sat Marjorie. She wore a simple navy dress, her documents stacked neatly in a manila folder on the table beside Samuel Drayton. Her face was calm, though inside her chest beat hard. She glanced across the aisle at Clifford Myers, who leaned back in his chair, whispering to his team of attorneys in tailored suits. His smirk said he still thought he could spin this his way. The judge, Honorable Patricia Long, banged her gavel. "This court will now hear arguments in Whitfield versus Lakewood Meadows, HOA, and Hanover Construction." The air thickened with tension. Samuel began with clarity, his voice steady. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Whitfield, has maintained continuous, documented ownership of this land for over 40 years. She has paid taxes, upheld her duties, and protected her rights. Yet the defendants, without her consent, without even verifying ownership, constructed an entire subdivision on her property. This is not speculation. This is theft." The words hung heavy in the room. Homeowners shifted uncomfortably, some whispering prayers under their breath. When Clifford's lead attorney rose, the tone shifted. "Your Honor, while we respect Mrs. Whitfield's claims, this land has been improved. 96 families now reside there. To grant her full control would cause irreparable harm to innocent homeowners. She is seeking a windfall at the expense of hard-working families." Marjorie's jaw tightened, but Samuel whispered, "Let him talk. The more he leans on sympathy, the weaker his legal footing." Witnesses were called. County clerks confirmed Marjorie's taxes were paid in full every single year. Surveyors testified that the subdivision had indeed crossed directly into her parcel. Samuel presented photos, maps, and certified deeds like puzzle pieces, each fitting neatly into the story of ownership. When Marjorie herself took the stand, the room fell silent. She spoke with quiet conviction, not anger. "My parents worked themselves to the bone to buy that land. They told me to protect it, and I have. I didn't build those houses. I didn't invite those families there. The HOA and the builders made that choice. Now they want to make me the villain for standing up for what's mine." Some homeowners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, they saw her not as a faceless adversary, but as a person who had been wronged. Clifford, on the other hand, grew increasingly frustrated. When he was finally called to testify, his bravado faltered. Samuel pressed him hard. "Mr. Myers, did you verify ownership before building on parcel 1467? "We relied on our partners," Clifford answered, sweating slightly. "So you didn't check?" We trusted the information available." Samuel leaned forward. "Trusted or ignored?" the courtroom murmured. Clifford's face flushed red. Meanwhile, the homeowner's emotions were raw. In the hallway during recess, Angela Ramirez approached Marjorie again. "I don't know what's going to happen, but I just want you to know I understand why you're fighting. This isn't fair to you either. Marjorie touched her arm gently. I don't blame you, Angela. You were sold a dream that wasn't theirs to sell. By the second week of testimony, it was clear momentum was shifting toward Marjorie. Every expert reinforced her ownership. Every document pointed back to her name. The HOA's arguments sounded thinner by the day, more desperate, more about optics than law. Still, the pressure was unbearable for the families. Some wept quietly in the pews, realizing their mortgages might collapse. Others grew angry, glaring at Clifford as if he had personally conned them. The final day of arguments was electric. Samuel stood tall, his voice ringing through the chamber. Your Honor, this is not simply a legal case. It's a moral one. The defendants thought Mrs. Whitfield would be silent, that she wouldn't have the resources to fight. But she did, because she respected the law when they did not. They gambled with land that wasn't theirs, and they lost. The truth is in these records, and the truth cannot be ignored. Clifford's attorney made one last plea, painting Marjorie as cold and inflexible, but the damage was done. The judge's eyes revealed it. She had already weighed the facts. Marjorie sat silently, hands folded, ready for whatever came next. She had fought her fight with dignity. But as the court prepared to deliver its verdict, the families outside those walls were bracing themselves for the shock of their lives, because someone's dream was about to be shattered. The verdict wasn't even in yet, but the weight of the lawsuit was already crushing the families of Lakewood Meadows. It started with small cracks, conversations whispered in kitchens, mortgage payments suddenly feeling heavier, trust in the HOA evaporating like morning dew. Victor and Angela Ramirez sat at their dining table night after night, the letter from Marjorie's attorney still in a drawer they couldn't bring themselves to throw away. What if the judge rules against us? Angela whispered one evening. Their kids were asleep upstairs, unaware their home could vanish with a stroke of a pen. Victor stared at his calloused hands. Then we fight for compensation. We didn't build this. We're victims too. The Briggs family felt it in another way. Lauren, 7 months pregnant, burst into tears after reading an article in the Macon Telegraph about the lawsuit. What if we bring our baby home and then they tell us we don't even own this place? She sobbed. Tyler held her, but the fear in his eyes betrayed his words. It'll work out, babe. It has to. At neighborhood gatherings, tension boiled over. The once celebratory HOA meetings turned into shouting matches. Residents demanded answers from Clifford Myers. You told us everything was fine, one homeowner shouted. Clifford raised his palms. It is fine. This is legal wrangling, nothing more. Legal wrangling. Another woman snapped. My entire retirement is tied up in this house. Clifford's confidence had slipped. No longer the untouchable leader, he now stumbled over words, sweating under the fluorescent lights of the clubhouse. Hanover construction representatives stopped showing up altogether, leaving Clifford to absorb the anger alone. Some families turned on Marjorie, blaming her for their nightmare. One evening, as she walked to her mailbox, a man in a baseball cap shouted from a passing car, You're destroying lives, lady. The words stung, but she refused to show it. Later, sitting with Samuel, she admitted, They see me as the enemy, but the real enemy is the one who sold them false promises. Others began to see her side. Angela Ramirez defended her at a community gathering, saying, She didn't trick us. Clifford did. She's protecting what's hers, and we'd all do the same. The room fell quiet, but the divide was clear. Half the community simmered with resentment toward Marjorie, while the other half simmered with rage at Clifford. Financial fallout came swiftly. Banks grew hesitant to approve new mortgages in the subdivision. Realtors pulled listings, fearing lawsuits from buyers. Property values froze, then dipped. Families who had stretched every dollar to move in suddenly found themselves trapped in homes they might never be able to sell. The stress weighed heavily on marriages and friendships. Tyler Briggs confided in a neighbor that he and Lauren were arguing constantly. She wants to run. I want to fight. Neither of us sleeps. Darnell and Monica Price, the retired couple, felt betrayed more than anything. Darnell, once a calm man, now seethed as he paced his porch. 30 years with the post office, and this is how I retire? On land that don't even belong to me? Meanwhile, Clifford tried damage control. He appeared on local TV, insisting the HOA was working toward a settlement. "We're in negotiations," he claimed, "and we're confident families won't lose their homes." But his words rang hollow. Behind the scenes, Hanover Construction had begun preparing to distance itself from the HOA entirely, leaving Clifford to shoulder the blame. The emotional toll was palpable. Children overheard their parents' anxious conversations and asked questions no parent wanted to answer. "Are we going to have to leave?" one little boy asked his mother as she tucked him in. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "No, sweetheart." But when she closed his door, she leaned against the hallway wall and wept. For Marjorie, the fallout was bittersweet. She never wished harm on the families, but she also knew every brick, every window, every flower bed had been built on what rightfully belonged to her. "They shouldn't be angry with me," she told Samuel one night. "They should be angry with the ones who gambled with their lives." Samuel nodded. "And that's what the court will soon make clear. But you should prepare yourself. No matter the ruling, people will blame you. Because blaming the truth is easier than facing who actually failed them." The families of Lakewood Meadows were caught in a trap they hadn't built, but they were living in its jaws. And as each day ticked by, their anger, confusion, and fear grew heavier. But the storm had only begun, because the court's decision was coming, and with it, the moment where dreams would either collapse or be rewritten forever. The day the verdict came down, the courthouse in Macon was packed so tightly that people spilled into the hallways. News crews had set up outside, their cameras waiting to capture reactions. For weeks, the community had been holding its breath, and now everything would be decided in a single ruling. Marjorie arrived early, walking slowly but with purpose. She wore a grey suit that had belonged to her late mother, the hem carefully pressed. Beside her, Samuel carried a heavy binder full of documents, though by this point he hardly needed it. The facts were undeniable. The land was hers, and the trial had made that clear. Still, Marjorie prayed silently as she sat down, not for victory, but for strength to carry whatever came next. Across the aisle, Clifford Myers looked pale. His usual bravado was gone, his tie loosened as he whispered frantically to his lawyers. The weeks of testimony had taken a toll. Homeowners who once cheered his leadership now glared at him openly. Even Hanover Construction had distanced itself, refusing to appear in the final hearings. Clifford was isolated, the weight of 96 families pressing down on his shoulders. Judge Patricia Long entered the courtroom, her expression unreadable. She adjusted her glasses, shuffled her papers, and began to speak. After reviewing the evidence presented, this court finds that the plaintiff, Mrs. Marjorie Whitfield, has maintained uninterrupted ownership of the disputed property for more than 40 years. Taxes have been paid, deeds recorded, and title reaffirmed. The construction of Lakewood Meadows on her land was conducted without her consent or knowledge. A ripple moved through the room, gasps, whispers, a muffled sob. Judge Long continued, her voice firm. Therefore, the court recognizes Mrs. Whitfield as the rightful owner of the property on which the Lakewood Meadows subdivision was built. The words dropped like thunder. Some homeowners cried openly. Lauren Briggs clutched her belly and wept into Tyler's shoulder. Victor Ramirez dropped his face into his hands. Monica Price stared straight ahead, her lips trembling. To them, it felt like their world had collapsed. But for Marjorie, it was vindication. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering, "Mama, Daddy, we did it." The judge, however, wasn't finished. As for remedies, the matter of compensation must be determined through further proceedings. Hanover Construction and the HOA are liable for damages. Homeowners will not be immediately displaced, but their residency is contingent on resolution between the defendants and Mrs. Whitfield. It was a legal way of saying the families weren't being thrown out that very day, but their futures were uncertain. Samuel squeezed Marjorie's hand under the table. "This is a victory. The rest will follow." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Clifford tried to rush past the cameras, but microphones blocked his path. "Mr. Myers, do you have a comment on the ruling?" one shouted. Clifford snapped, "This isn't over," before disappearing into a waiting car. When Marjorie stepped outside, the questions flew at her. Mrs. Whitfield, how do you feel about families losing their homes? Do you plan to sell the land back? Are you open to negotiations? She paused at the top of the courthouse steps, the sun warming her face. This was never about hurting families, she said calmly. This was about protecting what belonged to me and my parents, before me. The HOA gambled with lives that weren't theirs to gamble with. I did what anyone would do, defend what's rightfully mine. Her words carried both dignity and sorrow. In the neighborhood that evening, the atmosphere was heavy. Some residents directed their fury at Clifford, calling for his resignation. Others vented at Marjorie, convinced she had stolen their stability. But underneath it all, everyone knew the truth. The fault lay in arrogance, in skipping steps, in assuming a woman like Marjorie would fold under pressure. Inside her modest home, Marjorie placed the court's ruling in her fireproof safe. She sat quietly at her kitchen table, sipping tea, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything had. She had gone up against a system designed to overpower her, and won. For the families, the road ahead was uncertain. Would the HOA negotiate a buyout? Would Hanover Construction pay damages? Would they be allowed to stay? None of those answers came quickly. But one thing was settled beyond doubt. The land was Marjorie's, and no one could erase that again. But while Marjorie finally tasted victory, the deeper question lingered. What would become of the families caught in the wreckage of someone else's mistake? In the weeks after the verdict, Lakewood Meadows no longer looked like the picture-perfect neighborhood it had been advertised to be. On the surface, houses still stood tall, kids still rode bikes, and lawns were still mowed. But beneath the veneer, the community carried the weight of uncertainty. Every porch light seemed dimmer, every conversation shorter, every glance tinged with unease. For the homeowners, the ruling left them in limbo. They weren't evicted, but they weren't secure either. Some scrambled to call lawyers of their own, hoping to protect what they had invested. Others held late-night kitchen table discussions about whether to walk away altogether. Victor and Angela Ramirez tried to hold their family together, reminding each other daily that they had been misled just as much as Marjorie had been wronged. Yet the cracks were visible. Their children asked questions they couldn't answer. Are we moving again? Is this still our home? Lauren and Tyler Briggs debated putting their house on the market before their baby was born, but no one was willing to buy a property entangled in a lawsuit. We're stuck, Tyler muttered one night, pacing the hallway. We're paying a mortgage on a house that might not even belong to us. Lauren, exhausted and afraid, leaned against the nursery doorframe and whispered, We just wanted a future. Why is that too much to ask? Meanwhile, Clifford Myers resigned in disgrace. At the final HOA meeting he presided over, residents shouted him down, demanding answers. He offered none, only a hollow apology before walking out to a chorus of angry voices. His ambition, once celebrated, had turned him into the face of betrayal. Hanover Construction quietly reached out to Samuel Drayton, proposing a settlement. They offered a substantial sum to Marjorie in exchange for transferring ownership rights back to the HOA. But Marjorie didn't rush. She listened carefully, sipping her tea as Samuel explained the offer. Then she shook her head. This isn't just about money. They need to feel the weight of what they did. Every shortcut, every assumption, they thought I wouldn't fight. Well, I did. Still, Marjorie wasn't without compassion. She knew families like the Ramirez's and the Prices hadn't chosen this fight. They were collateral damage. One Sunday afternoon, she attended a meeting at a local church where some of the homeowners gathered. The room was tense when she walked in, but instead of defensiveness, she spoke plainly. I don't hate you, she told them. I don't want to see you suffer. But this land was stolen from me. I couldn't just let it go. What happens next will depend on negotiations. But I want you to understand. I'm not your enemy. The ones who sold you false promises are. Some listened with softened expressions. Angela Ramirez even stood up and thanked her. Others crossed their arms, unwilling to forgive. But for the first time, many saw her as a woman fighting for her family's legacy, not a villain tearing theirs apart. For Marjorie, victory wasn't about riches or revenge. It was about respect, about showing that ordinary people could stand against institutions that thought they were untouchable. She had preserved her parents' dream, not just for herself, but as a message to anyone who thought silence meant surrender. The lesson was clear. When you underestimate someone's resolve, you invite consequences you can't control. The HOA built 96 homes on someone else's land, confident they could bully their way through. Instead, they walked directly into a trap set not by malice, but by vigilance. Weeks later, as Marjorie walked her property line with cousin Thomas, she paused by one of the old iron markers that had been there since her childhood. "Daddy told me to never let this go," she said softly. Thomas nodded, his voice thick. "You honored him. You honored both of them." In the distance, the rooftops of Lakewood Meadows gleamed in the sun. For Marjorie, they weren't symbols of defeat. They were reminders that patience, persistence, and truth had carried her through. She had been underestimated, ignored, and insulted. But she had not been defeated. For the families, the road ahead remained uncertain. Negotiations would drag on, settlements would be fought over, and some might never fully recover the trust they lost. Yet even in their pain, there was a lesson. Shortcuts in life often leave scars, and trusting the wrong leaders can come at the highest cost. Marjorie's story became more than a lawsuit. It became a parable whispered in the county and beyond. It was about land, yes, but deeper than that, it was about dignity, about standing tall when others expected you to bow. And that is where the story leaves us, with a reminder that strength doesn't always shout, and justice doesn't always come quickly. But when it comes, it is undeniable. If you want more stories like this, real stories that remind us of resilience, courage, and truth, don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the battles we overlook are the ones that teach us the most.